The official 7/7 story is simple enough. It says that 4 young British Muslim men became suicide bombers, killing themselves and 52 others. They were Mohammed Sadiq Khan, Shahzad Tanweer, Hasib Hussain, and Jermaine Lindsay. There are dozens of problems with this story, too many to list in one short video. Perhaps the most important issue of all is that none of the 4 alleged bombers were counted among the dead on the evening of July 7th itself. Instead, their bodies were found at the scenes days later. This suggests that they weren't even on the tube trains and the bus at the times of the explosions, and so couldn't have been suicide bombers or responsible for these attacks.
He was a diamond in the school, someone you could turn to and trust. It's a huge moral paradox, but the more you think about it, the more the whole thing is totally paradoxical.
But if they didn't do it, then someone went to great lengths to frame them. The most obvious suspect is the British security services, who had information on the alleged bombers going back nearly 5 years before 7/7. The discussion offered by the government and mainstream media has only considered whether MI5 had failed to stop the alleged bombers, and has never considered whether the intelligence failures were actually a mask, a cover story, for covertly setting them up as the culprits.
Jumping to the easy conclusion to say that the security services failed, well, at one level they did, the bombs went off. But to describe that as a failure is, I think, to misunderstand the nature of what intelligence work is about.
The background is that for around 5 years prior to 7/7, Mohammed Sadiq Khan was engaged in somewhat radical activity. He was involved in an Islamic bookshop that ran training camps in the Lake District. He went to a training camp in Pakistan. He repeatedly met with other men in the UK who ended up being convicted of a major terrorist plot. The other alleged bombers were also involved in these activities to some extent. At every point along this journey, the British security services had information about what was going on, but at each point there were intelligence failures. Information wasn't shared between agencies, leads weren't followed up, and searches that should have picked up earlier information mysteriously failed. So what was going on? At each point that Khan and the others connected up to this wider network of radical Islamic activity, they connected to it via a probable secret agent. The Islamic bookshop and the Lake District training camps were run by a man called Martin McDade. McDade was known to the security services since 1998 and was the subject of sporadic investigations and surveillance in the years before 7/7. He was never arrested, even after the bombings, and has since disappeared.
McDade definitely wanted hardness training, some sort of, with a military bent to it, pushing people to the limits, making them work really hard, making them suffer. Basically, those were his words, he wanted them to suffer. I wondered if it was about converting people to Islam, if they had a different agenda completely, taking vulnerable young men, exposing them to literature, to extremist views, testing them, see how far they were prepared to go, and then grooming them.
The training camp in Pakistan was being run by an American called Mohammed Junaid Babar. Officially, Babar became an FBI cooperator in April 2004, but he was certainly working as a spy for several years before that. Almost everyone who passed through his camp ended up in court on the wrong side of terrorism charges, usually with Babar testifying against them. The others ended up dead and accused of being suicide bombers. Babar himself only served 4.5 years after pleading guilty to being an international terrorist.
He's an individual who had both the access and the capability to get into groups that simply would not have existed without him.
Khan, and possibly Tanweer, were sent to Babar's camp by Muhammad Qayyum Khan, known as Q. He also put Khan in contact with the gang who were ultimately arrested for the fertilizer bomb plot in early 2004, weeks after Babar officially gave himself up to the FBI. Though Q was an alleged Al-Qaeda facilitator, who was the whole reason why MI5 started the investigation that led to the arrests of the fertilizer bomb plot gang, Q himself was never arrested. He was never even called to the trial as a witness.
Was Q not arrested possibly because he was working for you or MI5?
I'm not prepared to comment on any speculation like that. Pure speculation.
But you know who Q is?
I know who Q is, but I'm not going to discuss who he is or what he does during this interview.
The pattern that has now emerged is that the intelligence failures before 7/7 did not just prevent the security services from stopping Khan and the others doing whatever they were doing. The failures also obscured their connections with these 3 probable secret agents. When West Yorkshire Special Branch were asked by MI5 to carry out surveillance on McDade in early 2003, they saw him get a lift in a BMW car that belonged to Sadiq Khan. Their own files show that they immediately carried out a check on the car and found out that it belonged to Khan, but they say that they did not consider this important enough to tell MI5. When Khan was identified by MI5 during their surveillance of the fertilizer plot gang in early 2004, they asked West Yorkshire Special Branch and another police intelligence unit if they had any information about him. The answer came back no trace, when the search should have flagged up the BMW from 2003. These failures not only stopped MI5 from finding out more about Khan, but also covered up his contact with McDade. Similarly, when MI5 came across Khan and Tanweer while investigating the fertilizer plot gang, they took surveillance video and photos and followed them for hundreds of miles. After the gang were arrested and Babar had become a cooperator, they sent photos to the US to see if Babar could identify these other men. The original photo is of good quality, with Khan and Tanweer quite recognizable. But MI5 chose not to send this image. Instead, they sent a terribly cropped black and white version. Babar's failure to recognize the men from these images not only prevented MI5 from finding out more about Khan and Tanweer, but also obscured their connection to Babar. Look again at the original image and the copy sent to the US by MI5. Ask yourself, is this an honest attempt to get these men identified? The other dimension to this story is that the security services clearly knew more than they say they did. When Khan went on one of McDade's Lake District training camps in January 2001, he was recorded by a video camera hidden in a barn. Naturally, MI5 say that he wasn't identified from this image until after 7/7, but they must have known about the trip in advance in order to hide the camera in the right place. Likewise, MI5 originally claimed that they first found out about phone calls between Khan and Q in July to August of 2003. Their own documents show that in fact they made that connection months earlier, in March 2003, also connecting Khan to McDade's bookshop at the same time. They also claim that when Babar first told them about two men who had visited his training camp called Ibrahim and Zubair, he did not make it clear that they were from the Leeds-Bradford area. Apparently, Babar did not explain this until March 2005, which was important as Ibrahim was Sadiq Khan. The problem is that MI5 knew that the two men were from that area of England many months earlier, in June 2004. So, the pattern is that at every point that Khan linked up to this radical network, he did so through a probable secret agent. At every point, the security services had information about what was happening, but did nothing with it. At every point, these intelligence failures meant that Khan and the others continued their journey to end up being blamed as suicide bombers, and covered up their connections to the probable agents. If this pattern of behaviour was not suspicious enough, there are a few telltale signs in the security service's use of names. First, their documents refer to the four alleged bombers as the Stepford bombers, which can only be a reference to the 1970s book and film The Stepford Wives. There is no real place called Stepford. In that story, a secret society of men in small-town America convert their wives into robots to make them more perfect. The term Stepford wife has since come to mean a woman who is obedient to her husband to the point of being submissive. Are these the characteristics of the Stepford bombers and their relationship with MI5? Two different security service operations, one before 7/7 and one after the bombings, also hint at the same idea. In April 2005, MI5 launched an operation to find out more about Ibrahim and Zubair, the two men who'd been at Babar's camp. They called the operation Down Tempo, which is a bit like codenaming it Operation Slow Down and Don't Bother. After the bombings, the police launched an investigation into what had happened and who was responsible. It was called Operation Theseus. Theseus was the mythical founding hero of ancient Athens, most commonly known for slaying the Minotaur. According to the legend, Theseus went to the labyrinth and tied a ball of wool or string to the doorpost before entering the maze and finding the Minotaur. He killed the monster and used the string to find his way back out. Critically, he laid down a trail for himself to follow. Was this the image that the British security services wanted to conjure up in their 7/7 investigation? That they were following a trail they had left for themselves? Even the three probable secret agents have curious names. Martin McDade, who claimed to be a former counter-terrorism commando, has the initials MM. This is the same as the character of Miles Messervy, or M, the head of MI6 in Ian Fleming's spy novels. Q is also the name of a prominent character in these stories. And Junaid Babar has the same initials as the hero of the series, James Bond. So, was this deliberate? Did the British security services use secret agents to manipulate these four men into doing incriminating things? Did they compartmentalise information and sabotage their own investigations, so as to allow this black operation to continue to its grisly end? Did the British security state carry out this attack to advance their power and privilege?